Hey everybody, this is TJR, and back in 1977, I was there. I sat in a movie theater and watched the original Star Wars back when it first came out. Back then, it was just simply called Star Wars. There was no Episode 4, A New Hope, during that opening crawl. That wouldn't be added until a couple years later when the film was re-released. And I remember going to see it just before the mania hit. Now, at that time, there were still lines to see the film, but it wasn't the insanity that would arrive very shortly, where you would see just lines stretched around the block, theaters with just crowds outside of it of people waiting to go see this movie. Back then, there was something I noticed immediately when I watched the very first Star Wars movie. I immediately noticed the influence that movie serials of the 1930s and 1940s had on Star Wars. And now, these days, when I talk to younger Star Wars fans, and I bring this up and I say, yeah, Star Wars was really influenced by the movie serials of the 1930s and 40s. And these young fans, they kind of look at me, and there's this confused look in their eyes. They don't realize what I'm talking about. And they say, what do you mean, movie serials? Do you mean like breakfast cereal? And I say, no, movie serials. And I realize they don't even know what a movie serial is. So what is a movie serial? A movie serial is a multi-chapter motion picture. Now, picture, if you will, an extremely long motion picture cut up into shorter 20-minute chapters. And then each chapter is released in theaters a week at a time. The beginnings of movie serials can be traced back to the silent era of movies. Now, have you ever heard the term a cliffhanger ending? It comes from movie serials. One of the common tropes of movie serials is the cliffhanger ending, wherein at the end of each chapter, our movie's hero or heroes find themselves in a perilous situation that won't be resolved until the next chapter. Oftentimes, the resolution of that cliffhanger ending wasn't nearly as thrilling as the build-up. But movie serials were never great cinema. They were, in fact, low-budget affairs. But that doesn't mean that they weren't a good time either. Movie serials were heavy on action, and they wasted no time on getting to the thrills. Movie serials became even more popular during the sound era that began in the 1930s, and they would run before your main feature. Yes, back in the day, you actually got more than just advertising before your movie. Hard to believe. Many comic book superheroes got their first live-action adaptations as movie serials, including Superman, Batman, Captain Marvel, heck, even Captain America. But movie serials also gave us Western heroes, detectives, and rough-and-tumble adventurers that would later serve as the inspiration for the Indiana Jones films. But movie serials would also give us science fiction, or perhaps I should say science fantasy. And this is where Star Wars comes in. In particular, I want to talk about two specific movie serials. The first one is Buck Rogers. The second is Flash Gordon. Now, both of these movie serials were based on popular newspaper comic strips at the time, and their newspaper adventures were also serialized, as were most newspaper comic strips during this era. Buck Rogers, or Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which was the newspaper strip's proper title, was originally created by Philip Francis Nolan and appeared first as a science fiction novel entitled Armageddon 2419 AD, published in 1928. In this book, the main character's name was Anthony Rogers, but it wasn't until a year later, when the character's name was changed to Buck and adapted into a weekly comic strip, that the character started to become truly popular with a mass audience. Flash Gordon was originally created by cartoonist Alex Raymond in 1934 to compete against the already popular Buck Rogers comic strip, and it remains one of the most beautifully drawn newspaper strips ever. Now, Buck Rogers tells the story of a 20th century man who sleeps in suspended animation only to wake up 500 years in the future to find the world ruled by a despotic dictator. Yes, even then, we had stories of dystopian futures. Flash Gordon tells the story of a young athlete named Flash who inadvertently finds himself transported to the planet Mongo, a world that is as technologically advanced as it is cruel and barbaric. Now, even though Buck Rogers beat Flash Gordon by 6 years in the newspapers, it was Flash Gordon that first got adapted into film and was released by Universal Pictures in 1938 in 13 installments. Buck Rogers would follow a year later in 1939 and was also released by Universal Pictures in 12 installments. Both films starred the now legendary Larry Buster Crabbe, a former Olympic champ turned actor. It's kind of interesting to think about the fact that he was starring in 2 film adaptations of popular newspaper adventure strip characters that were each published by 2 competing newspaper syndicates. This would be kind of like if today you starred first in both a Marvel Studios film one year and then a DC Comics film the next year. So let's look at the similarities. Like all movie serials of the day, they get right down to the action as quickly as possible, just like the original Star Wars did. Like Star Wars, both films have a young, idealistic hero whom, despite the adversity they must face during their adventures, remain true to what is the purest notion of what a hero should be, brave, noble, and self-sacrificing. In all 3 films, our heroes have a powerful and over-the-top melodramatic villain to contend with. In Star Wars, of course, Darth Vader. In Buck Rogers, Killer Kane. And in Flash Gordon, it's Ming the Merciless. In Buck Rogers, we have a story about a hidden rebel force that is violently fighting to overthrow the despotic ruler Killer Kane and his empire. Sound a little bit familiar? Now, unlike Darth Vader, Killer Kane isn't trying to control the universe, just the planet Earth. But with Flash Gordon, Ming the Merciless, well, one look at this guy and you know he is not going to be happy just ruling his homeworld of Mongo. First the Earth, tomorrow the universe. In Flash Gordon, we also have a lot of the more fantastical elements that are also apparent in Star Wars. We have fantastical aliens like the Lion Men and the Hawk Men. We have monsters. Not so much in Buck Rogers, whose universe is a bit more science-based than Flash Gordon's. Star Wars definitely borrows from both the more science-based and the more fantasy-based aspects of both of these movie serials. And it also borrows from the sense of swashbuckling action and adventure that both of these films have to offer. But one thing that both Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers have in common that Star Wars definitely borrows from is the space battles, and loads of them. Yes, the effects in these old movie serials are crude by comparison, but the attitude and the sense of adventure is the same. So far, I have been talking about more thematic influences, but there are also more obvious visual references, of course, too. Now, I had the advantage of having seen these movie serials on TV before seeing the original Star Wars. So when I first sat in the theater and I saw that opening crawl to Star Wars, I immediately recognized the movie serial influence. Both Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon used the opening crawl. When I saw the Cloud City in The Empire Strikes Back, I snapped my fingers and said, "That's the Cloud City from Flash Gordon." Heck, even those soft wipe transitions are taken directly from those old movie serials. Now, in interviews, George Lucas has always made no bones about this fact. He has always stated that he wanted Star Wars to have a movie serial motif. I remember reading interviews with him even as Star Wars was still filming and was barely a blimp on anybody's radar, that he felt that kids had no real cinematic heroes, and that Star Wars was partly his attempt to give kids the kind of heroes that he used to have as a kid watching those old movie serials on TV. Oh, and by the way, this little clip you're seeing right now is not from Flash Gordon, nor is it from Buck Rogers. It is instead from the movie serial The Fighting Devil Dogs. Can you tell me who this black-clad figure reminds you of? Now, I want to stop for a moment and acknowledge that these movie serials were not the only influence on Star Wars. There were a lot of other things that influenced Star Wars. There were the films of Akira Kurosawa. There were the John Carter of Mars books by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And there were movies like Fritz Lang's Metropolis, just to name a few. But the unabashed exuberance and romantic heroism, excitement, and just plain goofy fun of these old movie serials is certainly obvious if you've ever seen even a smattering of them. So far, I've only been discussing similarities. But how does Star Wars differ from these two movie serials that helped influence it? Well, first and foremost, in these movie serials, there is the complete absence of the hero's journey. In Star Wars, by film's end, Luke Skywalker is a different character at the end of the film than who we started with. The death of his uncle and aunt are what prompt him to leave his world behind and to step into a much larger one. And in each succeeding Star Wars film, his character arc continues. In fact, in the Star Wars films, all three of our main characters and even our main villain have their own individual character arcs. In Buck Rogers and in Flash Gordon, there are no character arcs for anyone. Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon are fully formed heroes right from the outset. Our villains have no backstory either, and they are villainous simply because the story needs them to be. These really aren't characters at all. These are character archetypes. Or to take a quote from the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy novel, back in those days, men were real men. Back in those days, women were real women. What these movie serials represent are the raw essence of what is the fun and adventurism of Star Wars without any of the human drama that elevates the characters to real characters that we can relate to. I think it's also interesting to note the differences that these two influential movie serials have with each other. The early Alex Raymond Flash Gordon comic strips were bold for their time for the level of raw sensuality that they presented. And the first Flash Gordon movie serial definitely takes its cues from those early strips. In Flash Gordon, everybody wants and desires someone. Flash Gordon and Dale appear to be hopelessly in love with each other, even though they only first meet each other in the film's opening chapter. They have no backstory together, but they become attached from the moment they are in peril on the planet Mongo. Flash and Dale desire each other. Ming desires Dale. He tries to make her his wife, or one of his wives anyways.
But that's bigamy!
Yes, and that's bigamy too.
Princess Aura, Ming's daughter, desires Flash Gordon. Prince Baron desires Princess Aura. And King Volton of the race of Hawkmen definitely has designs on Dale. In the end, Flash and Dale finally do end up hooking up with each other, though. Not so in the more chaste universe of Buck Rogers. In Buck Rogers, we only have one female character. In fact, I think she's the only woman on screen throughout the entire movie serial, and that's Wilma Deering. But unlike Dale Arden from Flash Gordon, who is mainly just there to be in peril and be sexy, which she is good at doing, by the way, Wilma Deering is an officer. She's an equal.
Lieutenant Deering calling the Scientist General of Earth. Lieutenant Deering calling the Scientist General of Earth.
Air Control Headquarters of the Hidden City. Go ahead, Lieutenant Deering.
Give me the Scientist General at once, please.
Throughout most of the film, she lets the men handle things by and large, but there are a few times where she's actually proactive. She fights the bad guys. She flies the ship. At one point, she even helps Buck escape. This is kind of unique for the time. Back in the 1930s, it was definitely more of a man's world. So it's interesting to note that the film's only female character is more than just a damsel in distress. In the opening of Star Wars, Princess Leia is first presented to us as the cliched damsel in distress, but that cliche is quickly turned on its head when she grabs the gun during the prison break scene and yells out,
"Somebody has to save our skins!"
So now maybe after watching this video, you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'd like to check out some of these movie serials before I watch Star Wars again. And if so, I want to make some recommendations. Now, first of all, these films are in the public domain, and you can find them all over the place in different editions. You can also find them on YouTube. But I'll be frank, what I've seen on YouTube is very poor quality, and I don't recommend you watching them there. But if you're going to try to pick them up on DVD, I want to make a few recommendations. Now, for Buck Rogers, once again, there are a number of releases out there, but the best release is from VCI. Now, VCI has put out a 2-disc DVD release. This contains the entire movie serial. All the chapters are here, and it contains a bonus disc of some really neat bonus features. But best of all, VCI has taken the time and the care to remaster the original picture. So this is the best I've ever seen these movie serials look. The picture's really nice and clear, and it really looks good. And so can't recommend this version of Buck Rogers enough. This is the only one you want to get. Now for Flash Gordon, once again, just like with Buck Rogers, there's a lot of releases out there. These are in the public domain. Anybody can release these. The best release I've seen so far comes from Image. They've released this very nice, attractive package. It's a hardcover style book fold-out. This actually comes with 4 discs. It has all 3 of the Flash Gordon movie serials. There were 3 of them actually produced, by Universal Pictures. The first one is the best one. It's called Flash Gordon. On this edition here, it's called Flash Gordon Space Soldiers. This is because at one point these were re-released under a different title, but it's the original serial. There's also the other 2 serials, Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe, and then also Flash Gordon's Trip to Mars. Once again, the first one is the best one, but they're all fun. This set here unfortunately contains no bonus features, and there really hasn't been any work done to try to remaster the picture, but they're at least going from at least a decent source, and so it's much better than what you're going to see on YouTube. This also comes, though, with a nice little booklet enclosed that features artwork from the original Flash Gordon comic strips and a little short essay. One other thing I want to mention, if you notice the cover of this package, it's been colorized. Now, these films are not in color, they're in black and white. And like a lot of film fans, I don't believe you should colorize classic black and white motion pictures. But I have to admit, this is one of the few times when I would make an exception. Looking at the bright 4 colors on this cover, I can't help but imagine that this film would actually benefit from this kind of exaggerated coloring technique. And I think it would be awesome if someone were to take Flash Gordon, the original black and white movie serial, and colorize it just like it is on this cover here. I think it would look awesome. So I want to put that idea out there. Maybe there's somebody out there who would like to tackle that project. Of course, what would be ideal is that since Universal Pictures owns probably the best possible source material for this, if Universal themselves would release it. Go back and rescan what you have in your vaults and try to remaster that picture, make it look as nice as you can in black and white. And then also do a digitized, colorized version here. And you could even probably add some cool lighting effects as well when you're doing that. I think that would be awesome. But more than likely, that's probably not going to happen. I'm sure that Universal probably thinks there isn't enough of an audience out there that would pay for that to make it worth doing. But who knows? You never know what might happen in the future. And now, lastly, I just want to stress here, these films and movie serials in general, they're not great cinema, okay? If you're going to watch them, just bear that in mind. These films were made on the quick, they were made on the cheap, and you get all kinds of great expository dialogue like this.
We'll use our disintegrator pistols.
These films were made for a young audience, 11 to 12-year-olds, so bear that in mind as you watch them. And if you do watch them, hopefully you will be able to tap into your inner 11 and 12-year-old. And also remember, these types of films were 12 to 15 chapters on average. These were not made for binge watching. Don't try that. Watch it in short little spurts, maybe a chapter a night. I think you'll have a much better time with it that way. Movie serials in general had a tremendous influence on Star Wars, but particularly Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. This is TJR. I realize there's probably a lot of older fans who are already aware of this, but I'm making this video for the younger fans, so hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to checking out your comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.
What's this about a Kane Squadron?
A Kane Squadron? Buck, I don't understand.
You don't understand. I just got a message from here. You'd sighted another Kane Squadron.
But I didn't.
I did that, Buck. I knew Willen would want to congratulate you, but she couldn't because she was on duty, so I sort of fixed things up.
Well, from now on, you can be my official fixer, buddy.
Well, I guess the first thing an official fixer should know is when he's not wanted.
Yeah.